Rob Bagchis A to Z of the Ashes, aka Mark the Forgotten Waugh. One of the most lauded nicknames, but it didn't stick once the dreamily elegant right-hander became a fixture in the side at the age of 25 in 1991, first instead of and then alongside his elder twin. Made centuries in his maiden and final Ashes innings, 10 years apart. B is for Barnes, England's truculent bowling genius, Sydney, who took 77 wickets in 13 tests on 3 tours with his swing, seam and wickedly spun medium pace. No one has ever bent the ball to his will, so mastery on hard, true Australian pitches. C is for combat. Dennis Lillee talks to officials about his illegal aluminum bat during the first test against England at Perth, December 1979. Credit Getty Images. The 197,983 match post-Packer reconciliation series was far from cordial after England declined to put the Ashes up for grabs and bottomed out when Dennis Lillee's attempt to market his gimmicky aluminum bat, the combat, in a test innings at the WACA was truncated by Mike Burley's protest. When Lillee threw it in anger, it flew farther than any ball had gone off its puny, hollow blade. D is for Donis, and Terry Alderman of Australia lies injured on the ground while the pitch invader is led away during the first test between Australia and England at Perth, Australia, the 13th of November 1982. Credit POPPERFOTO. Not even John Arlett's Freaker had as much dramatic impact as pitch invader Gary Donison at the WACA in 1982. The 19-year-old English migrant ran onto the field when England posted 400, swiped Australia's supreme swing bowler across the face and provoked him into trying to make a citizen's arrest with a retaliatory rugby tackle. Alderman dislocated his shoulder and couldn't bowl for a year. No Englishman averages more against Australia than the tough little Lancastrian Eddie Painter's 84.42 in 7 tests, and no innings captured the imagination more than his 83 at the Gabba on the Bodyline Tour in 1933 when he was summoned from his hospital bed after an England collapse and dug in, despite debilitating temperature and dizziness, for 4 hours to nudge the tourists decisively ahead. "It were not more than a sore throat," he said. F is for Fred. England's fast bowler Fred Truman was the first bowler to claim 300 test wickets. Credit PA. When England set sail on the SS Canberra for the 196,263 tour, the captain, Ted Dexter, was delighted to find the marathon runner Gordon Peary on board and asked him to devise a daily exercise regime for the players. They all knuckled down to it, except Fred Truman, who favored a deck chair after bowling more than 1,140 overs in the season. After debunking Peary's argument, he gazed out over the Atlantic and inquired, incidentally, "Can you swim?" G is for Garth. G is also for Gabba. Credit Getty Images. Duly dubbed for his physique, the strapping, relentless quick Graham Mackenzie was pivotal to Australia retaining the Ashes in 196,263 and 196,566, taking 5 furs at Adelaide in each series. Broke Geoffrey Boycott's finger on the opener's test debut in 1964 and his arm in 1971, set the tone for 2005's victory, with an extraordinary roughing up of Australia's once imperious top 3 at Lord's, and in contrasting fashion did the same at the Gabba in 200,607 with an anxiety-induced first ball wide that hooped to second slip. Now known as doing a harmy. I is for Ian Z and Botham playing against the West Indies. Credit Getty Images. Ian Chappell and Ian Botham have despised one another for 40 years since a much-disputed incident at the Centenary Test in 1977 which ended with Chappell on the floor. In 2010 they fought in the Adelaide Oval car park but have since resumed sticking to sour remarks and shunning each other as the Ashes' own Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. J is for Joyride. Gower and Morris. Credit Getty Images. England, 20 down with 2 tests to play in 199,091, were in self-flagellation mode and responded sternly when David Gower and John Morris, who had just made 132 against Queensland, tried to inject some joie de vivre into the tour by hiring 2 tiger moths from Joyride to buzz the players at the Carrera Oval mid-innings. Both were fined and Morris never selected again. K is for Kipix. Alan Kipix, New South Wales captain and exquisite golden age throwback as a stroke maker, became one of the first casualties of Bodyline, ducking out after 1 test in 193,233, claiming Harold Larwood was too bloody fast for me. Corrode the polemic and to Bodyline at the end of the series, irking Douglas Jardine but mobilizing the cricket-loving public. Australian fast bowlers Dennis Lillee and Jeff Thomson at Lord's Credit Halton Archive. Dennis and Jeff relatively benign, like a couple of coarse anglers with strong opinions about pale ale, but don't be fooled, their alter ego, the terrifyingly vicious Harridan Lillee and Thomson, was a veritable, sadistic menace, sharing 58 wickets in 197,475, breaking English bones, hearts, and minds. M is for McDermott. Craig McDermott bowling at Darren Gough in 1995. Credit Getty Images. Billy the Kid. McDermott played 9 home tests against England and took 6 furs. Left the 1993 tour with a twisted bowel, so at the start of the 199,495 series he was, according to Shane Warne, like a greyhound after a rabbit wanting to chase the Palms out of town. Took 32 wickets in a man of these Aries performance. N is for Nugget. Australian all-rounder Keith Miller is beloved by fans. Credit Keystone. Sir Donald Bradman will always be Australia's most exalted player, but Keith Miller is the best loved. The exuberant, charismatic and, above all, judicious all-rounder and fighter pilot scored 11 Ashes runs and took 87 wickets. Everything he touched, racehorse betting slips apart, took on his golden hue. O is for Oldfield. Struck on the head by a Harold Larwood delivery that fractured his skull at Adelaide in 193,233. Bert Oldfield's injury became the defining motif of Bodyline, even though the ball was delivered to an orthodox field. May have prevented the England team being lynched by acknowledging, "It was my fault, Harold. I was trying to hook you for 4. An away Ashes series wouldn't be the same without the Australian vernacular, sundries for extras, pickets for the boundary fence, sandshoe crusher for Yorker, badger for head-high bouncer, and neck and crop for castled. Without Richie, though, we may miss out on Dorothy Dix." Q is for Quaife. Tiny Willie Quaife, defensive batsman, dubious leg spinner and gun cover point, played all 5 tests for Archie McLaren's side in 190,102, the last of the private tours. They won the first test at the SCG but lost the last 4. The other WG scored his last century for Warwickshire in 1928 at the age of 56, the oldest ever player to do so in first-class cricket. R is for replacements. Colin Cowdrey leaves Heathrow Airport in London to reinforce the MCC team in Australia. Credit Getty. Creative. Colin Cowdrey, as rotund and jolly as Samuel Pickwick, was summoned from a Kent midwinter to take on Lillee and Thomson at the age of 41 in 1974, but could not muzzle the thunder. 20 years later, Gus Fraser and Chris Lewis joined the derelict squad to bowl England to victory in Adelaide. S is for Sardine. Douglas Jardine stands on the deck of the Orient liner Orontes, bound for Australia. Credit Getty Images. Home crowds took an instant dislike to Douglas Jardine in 192,829 because it saved time and barracked him as F. Sardine. "Australians don't really like you," said his teammate Patsy Hendren somewhat superfluously. "The feeling is F mutual," said Jardine. Frank Tyson, the fastest bowler Richie Benaud ever saw, took 25 wickets in the victories at the SCG, MCG and Adelaide in 195,455 that turned the series round from 10 down to 31 up. As the Calypso singer Lord Kitchener put it, "Good captaincy from Len Hutton, but the honours must go to Typhoon Tyson." U is for Under the Southern Cross. Australia's victory, first led by Rod Marsh at the Gabba in 1974. Nathan Lyon now holds the honor of being the toaster, leading what is, in truth, more of a chant. Under the Southern Cross. I stand a sprig of wattle in my hand, a native of my native land Australia. UF Beauty. V is for Vulture. Street End. Michael Slater of Australia in action in 1996. Credit Getty Images. Phil de Freitas' opening delivery from the Stanley Street End at the Gabba in 1994, a filthy long hop smashed for 4 by Michael Slater, set the tone for the series. But Martin McKeag from the Vulture Street End was even worse. He simply fed Slater, like an indulgent zookeeper doling out fish to a friendly seal, wrote Christopher Martin Jenkins in The Telegraph. W is for Wangaratta to Wagga Wagga, a road journey between state matches on which Brian Statham and Peter Loader were injured in a car accident that rolled them out of the last test in 195,859. Not that it made much difference, as England were trounced by Richie Benaud's astute captaincy and his chuckers and draggers. Xavier Doherty of Australia. Credit Getty Images. Along with Victor Trumper and Archie Jackson, Greg Chappell forms the holy trinity of great Australian batting stylists, but as a coach and selector he has rather more in common with the thick of its goofily sinister Stuart Pearson, and never more so than when picking spinner Xavier Doherty and Michael Beer ahead of Nathan Howritz for the 201,011 Ashes. Doherty took 3 wickets at an average of 102 in the series. Y is for Yabba. Stephen Harold Gascoigne, known as Yabba, was a regular on the Hill at the SCG who was celebrated as a great wit for the timing and content of his heckling, even if they now is inane as the zingers of the fast shows. Arthur, where's my washboard? Atkinson, e.g., I wish you were a statue and I were a pigeon. Z is for Zooter. Shane Warne poses backstage with the Moulin Rouge Australian dancers. Credit Getty Images. Once his shoulder gave out, Shane Warne lost his googly, but it didn't stop him becoming a flared trouser-wearing huckster before every series to try to con us, claiming he had invented a mystery delivery. Most famous of all was the zooter, a flipper in all but name, effective but far from novel.